Sure, there's probably going to be more folks join us tonight, but welcome to our October version of Farming After Dark, Finding a Better Way. It's my pleasure that we've got Kevin Fowler this evening to talk about Fowler Seed Marketing, and we'll talk about maybe some options next spring for those of us that are dealing with drought. Sounds like maybe Kevin's neck of the woods dealing with extra moisture, so you might have some muddy spots. But you're in Ohio. Things can rapidly change. I've had the pleasure of knowing Kevin for a few years. I think I met him probably fall of 1984 at the Ohio State University. He was my RA in Scott House, right? So,
well, at least I lived there for a couple of years.
Yeah. Oh, good time. So, Kevin, with that,
last millennium.
What's that?
The last millennium.
Yes. Don't remind me. I've got the grade to prove it. So, hey, with that, we'll turn it over to Kevin and just look forward to your presentation tonight.
Brown there, doesn't it?
Well, thanks, Van. It's a pleasure to visit with you guys, and I know one of the great challenges this year. It actually reminds me of one of the years back close to when Van and I were in school. The summer of '88 was a pretty dry year, at least in Central Ohio, and this had a lot of similarities. But basically, I put together a PowerPoint here that's developed from an email and sent out here not too long ago. Some of you may have seen it. At the end, there's a link that you can paste into your browser if you want to download the email version. But so basically, let's talk about. I'll just talk for a little while, and then we'll field some questions and hopefully have a productive conversation. So the residual effects of a prolonged drought and recommended mitigations, which is a 50-cent word for how do we fix it. The first thing we do is turn off our phone. So there's going to be three different areas that we talk about. The first one is the effects of the prolonged drought on mineral availability, and hopefully most of this is review or just kind of calling things to your attention. I don't think you have to have a degree in chemistry to understand these things, but a lot of our mineral nutrients exist in hydrated soil. In other words, soil with water in it, in an ionic form. In other words, you've got positively charged cations and negatively charged anions, and these things are unavailable in a salt form. So whether you're thinking about dry fertilizer or you think about the salt shaker that's sitting on your kitchen table, if it's in rock form, it's not available. If it's dissolved in water, then you have ions, which is how those minerals normally exist in the soil and can be moved around and available to plants and microbes and other things. Cations, the common ones that we deal with that you would measure on a soil test, and that are at least the major ones that are involved in plant nutrition, would be calcium, magnesium, potassium, zinc, manganese, and these are we know that these things attach or are somewhat attached to the soil particles, whether it be organic matter or clay, but they're actually held in a hydration shell. In other words, they're not stuck directly to the clay or directly to the organic matter. There's a water component that keeps them in solution. some of the anions, common ones of those would be your nitrates, your sulfates, phosphates, borates. And they are not attracted to the soil particles, but they exist in the soil as mild acids in the soil solution. So even though the soil, when it's moderately dry, is it doesn't have to be sopping wet for it to hold these things in solution, but it's kind of like things floating around in a soup, if you will. And basically, without adequate moisture, let's see, I gotta move this up so I can read my own thing here. Without adequate moisture, basically they revert to the salt form, which is not available. In order to get those things resolubilized, there we go. In order to get these things resolubilized, it requires not just moisture, but also a warm temperatures, a correct pH, and in some cases, the catalyzing biological activity. So if you think about a teaspoon of salt, if you have a cup of cold water and you dump that salt in it, most of it will sit on the bottom, right? And you can stir it and whatnot, and you can get a little bit of it to go in, but unless you warm that temperature up, you're not going to get it to go back into solution. And so when we're thinking about the longer term effects of a prolonged drought, when we have the minerals are tied up, it's not only the effect that we see currently, with plants not growing well, but at least part of the following season, that effect of the minerals being tied up will continue, because they're not just because you have rain doesn't mean that they're all instantly available again. So that's something that's important to remember. Here's a picture of some calcium sulfate. One of the products we sell is like a 5% K-sulfate solution, and it stays in solution as long as the temperature of that material is above about 55 degrees. But if you have a tote or a tank or something sitting outside and it gets, the ambient temperature of that material gets below about 55, it starts to sol out. And so this is kind of a picture of what you can imagine is happening in the soil, not because of temperature so much, but because of just the lack of moisture. And it takes, so to get that back into solution, you can't just stir it or agitate it and have it go back in. This is actually from a tote that I had, and I had to heat in the spring when I wanted to use it, I had to heat that water probably to 100, 105 degrees and agitate to get it to go back into solution. So once it's, whether due to lack of moisture or cool temperature or whatever causes, the minerals to revert to a salt bond as opposed to a hydrated, being ionic in the soil, it's much more difficult and time consuming to get it back into solution. So that's the mineral part of things. We can touch on that again later with some questions. But another area that the prolonged drought affects is the biological activity. Healthy soils are populated by a balance of bacteria, fungi, and other microbes. Some of them are beneficial and other ones are pathogenic. I think everybody knows that. Every species thrives in a range of moisture, temperature, pH, and mineral availability, among other things. Beneficials are essential in regulating mineral availability, decomposing dead material, and stimulating plant health. You've heard of acquired systemic acquired immunity. That's something that plants gain from their interaction with microbes. And so when we have prolonged drought conditions, I mean, populations of all these different microbes can increase or decrease rapidly as the conditions change. The beneficials tend to thrive in the ideal conditions, and when they thrive, the pathogens tend to be under control. Pathogens are more opportunistic and they increase in less than ideal conditions, partly because there's less beneficials and partly because they're maybe more widely adapted than some of those beneficial organisms. So, you can begin to think that, when we get into a prolonged drought or, dry and heat stress, very sensitive organisms, even though they may be beneficial, may become locally extinct. Others may enter a dormant state. And, but for sure they are, anything that's not able to thrive in heat, drought, lack of plant activity is going to rapidly decrease in population. And then once they're either in a dormant, if they're extinct, they're gone, they're not coming back. If they're breaking dormancy, it requires, again, like the minerals, it requires not only moisture, but it requires the right temperature range, food sources, so on and so forth, for them to decide that it's okay to come out of their spore or whatever and begin to proliferate. So there, we've already said this, but beneficial microbes are negatively impacted by a prolonged drought, in large part because a lot of those rely on the sugars that are produced by plants. And if the plant's not growing and producing sugar, then those that rely on it are going to starve. Regeneration of adequate populations is going to take time, and certain species are just not going to recover without being reintroduced. So the result is that we have less nutrients available, partly because they're tied up, partly because the microbes are not there to make them available. And we also have greater disease pressure because the pathogens are no longer being controlled, and they're free to do their thing. We'll come back to these and field some questions on them here after we work through these. But another area, the third area that I want to call out, is that the effect of the prolonged drought on plant physiology, or in other words, the way the plant grows. Cool season grasses, which your fescues, your metafescues, orchard grass, perennial ryegrass, timothy, etc., start their calendar in July and end it in June. So, we all know that they produce seed heads typically in the month of June sometime. That's the end of their calendar. Okay. What we're interested in tonight is that tiller buds are set from July through September based on the conditions during that window, and they determine yield potential for the following spring. A tiller bud is basically, a spot on the crown where a tiller is going to sprout. And Obviously, if you have a crown that has 2 or 3 tillers, it's not going to yield the same as one that has 6 or 8. And if conditions are not favorable for the plant to set a good number of tiller buds, then regardless of what the conditions are in the spring and how much fertilizer you pour on it and anything else, your yields are going to be impacted. Another effect is that insect pressure has a greater impact on plants that are weakened by the drought. We got 3 different pictures here. A lot of times, at least in agriculture, we don't really think about the insects that chew on our grasses. If you're in the turf industry or the golf course industry, you're all over this. I mean, it's probably a whole whole books written on the effects of insects on the roots and the leaves and the whatever. But in agriculture, we don't pay a whole lot of attention. But the picture in the upper left is basically you can see a lot of brown roots. Healthy roots are white. This is a plant, and you can see the couple tillers there that are brown. Those have been the roots have basically been eaten, possibly by a grub, which is what's in the hand there on the right hand, or the crown has been drilled by one of these bugs in the middle. It's interesting as the last couple of years as I've become a little more familiar with this, you go out and you look at the brown areas in a given pasture hayfield, and you do a little digging, and you find that I think particularly 2 years ago in the spring, when pretty much across Ohio we had a weak first cutting, and we blamed it on cold weather that suddenly changed to hot weather. But if you did some digging, you'd see that there was a lot of insect damage on the roots and in the stems, and that a lot of plants only had, out of 8 or 10 tillers that were coming out of the crown, there might only have been 2 or 3 that were still green. So anyway, insect pressure is even greater on plants that are weakened by the drought. Grubs feed on the roots, crown borers kill the individual tillers. I noticed a lot of grasshoppers feeding on the leaves and the stems this time around. The symptoms, which you can see from, be similar to what turf people worry about on their lawn, is brown patches, general thinness, and the thing we're most worried about is reduced yield. So those are the 3 effects that I'm going to focus on, call out, and that now we're going to talk about at least some options for how do we mitigate this? How do we fix it? So if your pasture or hayfield have gotten enough moisture to green up, which I was down that way, or at least in southwestern Ohio a couple of weeks ago or a week ago, and they'd had 5 or 6 inches of rain in the locale that I was in, and not much of it had run off. So if you're fortunate to have gotten inches of rain, your grass may have started to green up. So if that's the case, then the essential nutrients can be efficiently gotten into the plants, because remember, just because you had moisture there, the minerals in the soil are not just instantly going to become available. So essential nutrients can be efficiently gotten into the plants by applying a foliar application. 95% of the nutrients are absorbed into the plant. I think the difference between what I would call a buggy program, where you're spreading dry rocks on the field, those require moisture to be solubilized, so that they become ionic, like we talked about initially. And then the plants and the biology have to have enough moisture to draw those in. And so for the reasons we previously discussed, that process is facing challenges both in the drought and coming out of the drought. So one of the things that we have put together is what we call our bioenhanced fertility programs. We have them for 8 different crops, including hay and grass hay, mixed hay, alfalfa hay, pasture, so on and so forth. And in there's a section towards the end called reserve building, and it's basically focused on a foliar that you can do that's a combination of minerals and a biological that, regardless of whether you've had a drought or not, helps to build those reserves in the plant going into winter. As we mentioned, microbes have been, probably the beneficials have been significantly impacted by the drought stress. So if you have an existing stand, it can be re-inoculated by including a combination of the beneficial organisms in a foliar, which would be part of the bioenhanced program. A number of organisms can now be applied to seed. So in some cases, you're thinking about thickening it up or reseeding completely. And, the way to get the organisms in contact with the seed or the plant is to basically put it on the seed. That way it's there as soon as it sprouts. I didn't grab this picture. Maybe I can grab it here at the end. But a year ago at Farm Science Review, we had a really good comparison of with basically the benefit of biology on these beneficial microbes on seed that was planted like 3 weeks before the show. And the one that didn't have anything on it, 3 weeks of growth, was about an inch and a half, 2 inches tall, and thin enough that if it was in the field, you'd start to see some weeds coming. We had 3 different trays that had same seed planted with individual products on it, and those were probably 3 or 4 inches tall and a fair bit thicker. And then we had one tray where we had all of those products mixed together, and same seed, and it was probably 6 or 7 inches tall and very thick, where if you were a weed, you were going to have a hard time making it in there. So and what that shows us, or is the effect of those biologicals helping to bring the nutrients that are in the soil into the plant. They all do a little bit different things, but it basically stimulated the early growth and the vigor, and it continues to do that through the growth of the plant. So getting beneficial microbes back into the system after a drought is a pretty important thing. Well, what do you know? I didn't remember that I put this up there. So here's the reserve building part. The MVP is a liquid multi-species biological. The Agri-K Plus not only has a 3-5-15 analysis, but it also has trace elements, and it has humates and it's a number of other things that help to stimulate the biology and all those things. So there's nothing magical about the rates. We could adjust those according to the situation, but there's an example of, even though it's mid-October, something that could still be done if your grass is managed to perk up and green up after the drought. So, and then finally, let's talk about, okay, so maybe, if you go out there and you look at your stand, some of them might be minimally impacted. In other words, it looks like it's there and coming back and still fairly thick. So my suggestion there is that you just apply, an aggressive foliar to address the minerals, the biologicals, and, depending on, especially if you do a little scouting and you see that you've got, some insects chewing on the roots, or, or find any grubs or anything like that, we include something in there to help address that. If it's a little worse off, if it's moderately impacted, well, now you may need to interseed. We would typically do a prorated amount of seeds. If the bare ground rate's 35 or 40 pound of a pasture mix and you've got a 75% stand, then we'd put in about 10 pounds. If you got half a stand, we'd go with about 20 pounds. If you're, if it's more than that, I would probably call it severely impacted and not moderately impacted. But so you can interseed, a prorated amount of seed inoculated with the full package of biologicals, and foliarly apply some nutrients to the stuff that's there, and maybe you need some insect or disease control along with it. We move on to severely impacted stands. Couple options. One is you may want to consider rotating it to an annual. I mean, we're getting a little on the late side now. A couple weeks ago, rotating that to triticale or something like that would have been a very good option. Partly because it's getting late, and partly because I'm sold out of triticale. It's maybe not as good an idea as it was 2 weeks ago. And if or you could do that, you may end up rotating it in the spring. An option there is if there's enough to get some spring grazing or first cutting of some sort, then you can spread some manure, or either spray it or till it and spread some manure on it and put in like our cow candy sorghum Sudan for the summer or something like that. But if whenever you rotate to an annual, you should put the full package of biologicals on the seed. And then as the annual finishes up, you can reseed it to hay or pasture after the annual is harvested. Option 2 would be to, if this is, again, severely impacted stands, there's not a lot left, 25, 30% or less that's coming back. You could basically reseed with a full rate of pasture grass together with the bioenhanced program. And I guess the only caution I would say there is that make sure that you look for other reasons besides just dry weather that may have taken out your stand. I mean, it could be dry weather plus insects. It could be dry weather plus poor fertility. It could be, dry weather plus compaction. And so don't just assume that throwing more seed out there is going to fix your problem. If, it's a good time to dig a little deeper and make sure that you address whatever, compounding factors may have been involved. So that's pretty much what I had to share. I included my contact stuff there, and if you see the last line, there's a link that you can paste into your browser, and it should take you to the email version of this that we sent out. It's got some links to, the program, and I think there's a pasture mix text sheet and a triticale text sheet and so on and so forth. But if you're interested in that, you can do that way. So that's what I have. So I think it might be good to have some questions and answers and see what you guys are finding out there.
Yeah, so you got a couple options for that. You can either type into the chat or just unmute yourself. We're a pretty safe group here, that you can just get on. I'm working off my Wi-Fi on my phone, and I'm kind of in the middle of nowhere. So if I happen to bleep out here, I think Doug McConnell, you on here, Doug?
Yes, sir.
All right. So I have tasked Doug with with being my backup plan. So, does anybody have any questions? I'm sure what when Kevin had sent me that email, the information he was talking about, and I guess I didn't realize the impact, the fertility impact on drought, dry conditions. I knew potassium was an issue, especially on low potassium soils, because my understanding is potassium moves on water films, but I didn't realize that salt connection and some of the stuff you were sharing there. Come on, I'm sure. Come on, Hendershot. I know you got to play Stump Kevin here.
You have to figure out the technology first.
There you go. Yes. My one question would be on frost seeding this coming late winter, early spring. How successful will we be if we stay dry?
Well, how dry is dry?
Less than 50% normal production.
So, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So I would say that, obviously you have to have enough moisture to not only sprout the seed, but be able to solubilize those nutrients that are there, phosphorus and calcium, other nutrients that are needed. You typically don't think of moisture being a problem in the winter, but
file on Riverview.
If you continue to not have moisture, then that may be an issue. Any other questions?
More like normally count on Mark Sterling.
Yeah, I'm here. I just couldn't find the right button.
All right.
Yeah, sorry I was late getting on because my computer decided it wanted to update a whole bunch of stuff. I'm just curious. You commented that there was a place that had 4 or 5 inches of rain, and I know here in our county, there's a couple of producers I spoke with that got anywhere from 2 to 5 inches. I have a farm on the north end of the county and the south end of the county, and we got 1.5, and we are very, very dry. It did turn the grass green, and the pastures that we rotational graze are starting to come back. We're feeding a lot of hay, so is everybody else. But what direction do we go in the spring? Doesn't look like we're going to get any rain soon.
Well, so if you have enough moisture to get the grass to green up, then it's not necessarily going to regenerate the water table and all that, but that's telling you that you've rehydrated at least the root zone. At least at the level where these minerals can ionize, assuming that we're fortunate in that the soil temperatures are still fairly warm. I mean, I haven't stuck a probe in the ground, but I'm sure they're probably all of at least 60 or 65 still. And so having moisture should help to solubilize some nutrients, which the grasses will utilize to some degree. But as we talked about, that's a long process. I mean, you think about dissolving, a tablespoon of salt in water. I mean, it's you got to work at it for a little bit to get it to happen. And so, especially when a lot of the beneficial biology that's way more important in that process than we were ever taught in Ohio State or wherever. Those microbes are actually more efficient than the plant roots in drawing those ions off of the soil particles, and so if they're not there, then it requires even more moisture for the
Get her, Gabby!
then the nutrients basically have to find the root as opposed to
All right.
being brought in by the biologicals. So yeah, whether you wait, I mean, I would tend to to say doing it sooner rather than later. I mean, the next big stress on our plants is winter, when you got less sunlight, you got colder temperatures, you got and if they don't have an adequate mineral reserve, grasses that's in the stem, alfalfas and stuff, it's in the root, then they're less likely to make it through the winter.
All right. So, and I guess another thing that this is a curiosity. It's dry enough here now to just trying to figure out, does it bother the microbes and the minerals? I dug a ditch 4 feet deep this morning, 8 feet wide, and it was just as dry 4 feet deep as it was on top of the ground.
Yep.
And that particular field is usually wet. Does that affect the microbes and the organisms that support us 12 inches or 16 inches deep?
So most of your organisms, probably not all of them, but most of them are going to live in and around the roots, in the aerobic zone. So yeah, you might have some roots that are down that deep, and you might have a few hardy microbes that are attached to them, but the majority of the biological activity is going to be in the whether your main roots are 4 inches, 6 inches, 8 inches, a foot deep, whatever, that topsoil area is the primary area that you're going to worry about. I mean, I'm not saying that it won't affect the fact that it's dry down that far and it's going to take
Nice,
a lot,
Gabby.
but in the short term, it's more about
What's up top?
that top few inches.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Anybody else?
Hey, Kevin, back to Bob's question on the frost seeding. Would you recommend any type of additional foliar or any additional microbial products? I'm assuming, like most of your seeds are probably already have some, biological treatment with them. And I guess if you're looking at applying a foliar for after frost seeding, any recommendation on when you would apply it?
So typically you're going to put the whole idea of a frost seeding is to get the seed to the ground before whatever else is there starts to come along. So, if grass is greening up and starting to grow, then you're a little late for frost seeding. But I would put, typically, historically, we've always put rhizobia on clover. I think you can do a more robust package with some other things that will help to inoculate those clover plants so that as they start to grow, they'll just be able to have better vigor and more early, faster early growth. In terms of the foliar, you're typically going to wait there until the grass or the crop is actively growing. So, you might be as much as a month after frost seeding. And at that point, I mean, whether you foliar something now or you foliar it in the spring, you're basically putting nutrients right into the plant. The word picture I like to use is, if you've ever had or known somebody that has a dairy and they have a cow with milk fever, you don't bring in a truckload of limestone and dump it next to the cow. The vet gets an IV with a little bit of calcium and he puts it in the vein and hopefully she gets up, right? So it's not as much about pounds, it's about availability, and foliaring is a small amount of material put in the right spot, and it transforms the plant in a hurry. So whether you do it now or you do it in the spring, that's a very good way of getting plant nutrients into a stressed plant. Go ahead, Mark.
I don't have anything.
Okay. Your name popped up. That's why I asked.
Oh, sorry. I just joined. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, good job.
So for you guys that just joined, if at the end of the PowerPoint, there was a link where you can get essentially the summary of what we talked about. Any other questions?
2 minutes to play in the match.
So
Final
Kevin,
3 minutes.
Yes.
if people would happen to get bored and they want to go out and they dig around a little bit, you showed that picture of the nodules or the tillers there. If they don't find any tillers, should they be thinking about doing some of that reseeding or interseeding come spring?
Well, so if I'm suggesting that about a week after it rains a reasonable amount, that you probably should go scout your field, and tillers that are, plants that are going to come back should start to have some green tillers at that point. And if they don't, doing a little digging would help you to figure out whether dry weather by itself doesn't usually kill a plant. So there's probably something else going on. There might be a bug, there might be a disease, there might be compaction there, and if you dig up those roots and they're all brown, then you know, it's likely that it's one of the culprits that I showed in the pictures. Or if you look at the side of the stem, I've seen a number of plants where it looks like somebody took about a 1/8 inch drill bit and just drilled through the side of the crown, and it's dead. And that's from those you know, I call them crown borers, but those little black insects that basically that's what they do. They just drill into that sheath area of the you know, the lower sheath, top of the crown, and they just eat the stuff that's in there, and plant, you know, the tiller dies.
Congratulations to both teams on a great
So,
match
does
this
anybody
evening.
else have any,
Everybody be safe at home.
any questions for Kevin? Kevin's a wealth of information.
Hey, Kevin, I got a question about, so when we're talking about biologicals, is like compost tea from vermicompost, is that anything you've had any experience with?
So your compost teas, manure teas are essentially the liquid that comes off of a compost pile or a manure pile or whatever, and they may have some you know, some biology in there. They certainly have, you know, a lot of organic compounds that leach out of the parent material, and they typically stimulate in a lot of the you know, they can stimulate biological growth if there's biology there to stimulate, but they're typically not standardized. And so like the MVP that I mentioned there earlier is it has some of those food sources like you would get out of a manure tea or a compost tea. They actually it's actually built on a herbal extract just because it was designed to not only be used in row crops but also in vegetables. And you know, you don't really want to use a manure tea if you're spraying it on lettuce or something like that. You might get a call from a lawyer. So anyway, they went to an herbal extract as the base for that, as opposed to a manure extract. But it's, you know, it has a lot of the same properties, and then basically they're infusing into that known amounts of a wide range of beneficials. So compost teas, manure teas, yeah, they will have a somewhat of a beneficial impact, but because they're not standardized, you may be really great one year and not so good the next time, just because you really don't know what you're putting on. So, and if they're and it would be true of not only those, but any other so-called biostimulant or anything like that, you have to have the beneficial organisms to stimulate, or you're going to be stimulating the ones that you don't want. And that's, you know, like we talked about in the biological section, you know, a lot of the beneficials live in a pretty tight range of temperature, moisture, you know, they live off the sugars that are produced from the plants. And if those are not there, you know, I mean, none of us are going to work too hard if we haven't gotten to eat for a week or two, you know, and some of us may not be around if we didn't get to eat for 2 or 3 weeks. I don't know, you know, so biology, the beneficials are not a lot different than that.
Thank you, sir.
Kevin, you may have covered this, but let's say we do opt to do either interseeding or reseed next spring. How long should we keep the livestock off of it to let it get established?
So it's going to depend a little bit on what, let's say if we're talking a pasture mix, we would typically say, 6 to 8 weeks until you get up to where it's, 8 or 10 inches tall, which obviously if we continue to have dry weather in the spring, it may take longer than that. If we go the other extreme, to get back to average, if it turns wet after all this, then you may have your 8 or 10 inches of growth, but you want to go out there and you want to grab a handful of it, kind of like the cow would grab with her tongue, and you want to jerk on it. And if you can pull the plant out of the ground, you better wait. You better clip it, and the next time it gets up to 8 or 10 inches, then you can turn in. But it's probably more important to make sure that you give, if you're going to do a new seeding in the spring, that you provide some very available nutrients, because they may, the ones that are in the soil may take a while to become available again.
All right, last call for questions.
I guess one other comment I would make is that if you're desperate for feed for this winter, the one thing that you could probably still do is no-till in, assuming you have at least a little bit of moisture, but no-till in some Aroostook rye. Back in the late 90s, down at Jackson, they compared a number of the rye varieties that were on the market at the time, and Aroostook was one of the top couple in terms of both fall growth and growth for grazing the winter and in the spring. So if you're trying to figure out some other plan besides buying hay or selling cattle, no-tilling some Aroostook into, whatever places you've got, that's, you can plant rye all the way up till, after Thanksgiving, for that matter, and it'll still come up. Obviously, you're not going to turn out on it and graze it right away, but about a month of growth, and it usually is pretty, there's at least something there to graze. Any other questions?
Yeah. So with that being said, thank you for mentioning that, because that's been on my mind. Back in late August, I drilled in some oats and kind of praying for rain, and never happened. They're coming. They sprouted, and weather straightens up here next week. Maybe we'll get a cut, and it's on ground that we can't pasture, but maybe we can cut some. But that rye, if it would be drilled in, say, between now and mid-November, and the winter holds out, providing it doesn't sow 6 inches deep and stay on the ground, what tonnage would be there? Is it going to be 6-8 inches tall, you think, or
So
where would it be at?
anytime you seed something, it's how well it establishes and grows depends on the next 30 days. You want moderate temperature and moderate moisture.
Yeah.
So if we assume moderate temperature and moderate moisture, and some fertility out there, then it's not out of the question to have 6 or 8 inches of growth in 30 days. And Bob can help me out here, but I'm thinking that about every 6 or 8 inches of harvested material is probably basically a ton of dry matter. About probably 6 inches on something like that,
Okay.
if it's a reasonable density. Would you agree with that, Bob?
There we go. Yeah, that'd be, assuming it was seeded thick enough,
Yes,
so you'd have to have
at least 2 bushel the acre.
Yeah.
Maybe-
I was gonna say what, 2 bushel or maybe 100 pound.
Well, so rye is 56 pound bushels. So if you do two
Okay,
bushels,
so
that's 112.
120, 125.
120
Yeah.
pounds.
2 to 2.5 bushel. Be what, somewhere in that range.
Okay, nice. Good info. Thank you.
And if you have ground that's, if you're kind of a cow guy, but you're also a crop guy, and if you seed your rye good and heavy, you can graze it during the winter and then let it come along and plant your beans into it in the spring.
Yep.
If that's what you're into.
Good point. We don't do that. We're pretty much cow calf, but and stalkers, but
Yep.
that would work too. Yep. Thank you.
And basically, if you put the rye in, get what you can get off of it this winter, and then if it's on ground that you can, if you're running, if because you've had to feed a lot of hay this winter that you would normally, maybe have a little bit of reserve for next summer, you may want to follow the rye with, cow candy, sorghum Sudan, or something like that. Just because annuals will produce more off of a small acreage than your perennials, while you get everything back where you'd like it to be.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Well, Kevin, thank you.
Sure thing. Looks like you're ready to go home.
Yeah, we lost 4-1. So it'll be an
Yeah.
hour trip home.
Yep. So like I say, guys, I don't know if you were able to, did you share the, or make the PowerPoint available other than when it was up there for anybody who didn't grab my email or whatever, or the
Well,
the-
this is going to be this was recorded, so
Okay.
give us a couple days, and then we should have it up on our website and also our YouTube channel. So
Okay. So for any of you that just joined in and you didn't get all that, or you're not, you got your questions more urgent, my email is kevin@fowlerseed.com. And so you can just shoot me an email, and if you have questions that were too shy to ask, or something that something else that you wanted to pursue sooner rather than later. So thanks, Van.
hey, thanks everybody. We've got Bridget Britton from OSU Extension on next month in November, talking about just kind of stress, de-stress, mental health stuff. I'm trying to negotiate to get somebody on in December to talk about the potential for rolling blackouts with our limited electrical supply and grid. And then in January, we're going to have Joel Salatin on. So we've got a pretty good lineup coming up. So, Kevin, once again, thank you. Send some of that rain south.
Well, we're shipping hay, but if we could figure out how to put rain in a tanker truck, we would make far more money.
All right.
So we'll
All
talk
right.
to you guys later. Thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Everybody have a great evening.
Thank you.